But that should give you a sense. I should also honestly say that I feel really good about Drupal 7. Between us, and don't tell anyone else. I think it's actually more stable than the initial Drupal 6.0 release. Thanks to the test framework and all of those things. The Examiner is a great example. It's probably the biggest Drupal site today. It's in the Alexa top 100. They just launched on Drupal 7 last week. So I think it's a great sign of how stable Drupal 7 really is. Doesn't mean you should start using it. There's still a few issues. But if you know what you're doing, I think it's a stable platform. So again, so Drupal has gotten a lot of momentum in just the last 3 years. And if you look at that, if you think about it, all of that success was built on Drupal 6. And meanwhile, we've been working on Drupal 7 for almost 3 years. So I think once Drupal 7 is out, I think that will continue to fuel our growth for the next couple of years, just like Drupal 6 did. And historically, we've been doubling in size with every major release of Drupal. So I fully expect that to happen as well. So here's a quick story. Anybody knows this picture? It's called the galloping horse. And so at some point, people were wondering if a horse's hooves were ever off the ground, right? And so the name of the person was Leland Stanford. He's actually the founder of Stanford University. He basically tasked a photographer to figure it out for him. He made a bet. He betted that the hooves would actually come off the ground for a short moment in time. And so he made a bet, and he sort of tasked somebody to figure it out. And so he asked this guy, I think it's pronounced Muybridge or something, to figure it out. And it took him a few years. It actually took him 5 years to figure it out. But what he ended up doing is, on a horse race track, he essentially put up 12 cameras with little strings. And so he was able to take 12 pictures, or I don't know the number of pictures, more than 12. It was able to take a lot of pictures in just 1 or 2 seconds. And so as a first person to really take really rapid pictures, it's a little bit like how they did the Matrix. But he essentially discovered that, as you can see in some of the pictures, the hooves actually are off the ground. So that was an interesting discovery. But the bigger thing which this triggered was that he actually invented motion pictures. This was the first little movie and led to the start of the movie industry, if you will. That was done by this guy. And to me, that's actually a little bit of an analogy with Drupal. I think, the way Drupal works, I think is changing the way people build websites. Instead of having to be a developer and writing a lot of code, with Drupal, all of a sudden you can assemble a website because you have thousands of modules available. You can download them, install them, and basically configure your website. And that's a huge differentiator from things like Django or Rails, where you still need to be a developer to get the website built. Versus with Drupal, you also still need to be a developer, but it's a little bit less development. And I think it's the beginning of a new era, just like with the invention of movies, because I think that's the way people will build websites in the future. And I think Drupal and open source content management systems in specific are the only projects that can be part of this movement, because the closed source vendors, they don't have 6,000 modules. They don't have the community that we have to provide all of these modules and to get to the point where people can actually assemble a website. So I think that's going to be a big reason, in addition to Drupal 7, in addition to the redesign, that I think Drupal will continue to grow in the future. So what I wanted to do is basically talk about 2020. So Drupal is almost 10 years old. I think we'll celebrate it in Chicago for sure. But imagine we're 10 years further down the road. We have Drupal 11. If we assume we do 2 major releases every year, we'll have arrived sort of at Drupal 11, which could be an interesting release. I'll talk a little bit about the features in a bit. I need some water real quick. If anyone has ideas for features? All right, I'll keep moving. We'll talk about features in a bit. So if you look at our growth over the past 10 years, we went from 0 to 600,000 posts on D.O, but you can't use any other statistic. It pretty much draws a very similar graph. So next we extrapolate that by 10 years, and you'll see we'll have roughly 7 million posts in 2020. And I used, as you can see from the R square, it's a very accurate plot. Like if it's 1, it means it's 100% accurate. So this should be, a very accurate plot based on the information that we have today. Of course, it might go in all sorts of directions. But if we run with this for a while, and we believe this is a good guess, we'll go from 600,000 to almost 7 million, which means we'll grow by a factor of 11. So imagine everything grows by a factor of 11. Our community, our website, everything. It's pretty scary. But we'll get there. So for a moment, let's assume that we only grow by a factor of 10 because it's a little bit easier to deal with. So over the next 10 years, we grow by a factor of 10. Sounds feasible to me. So that means we'll have 60,000 modules. Perfect. Of course, nobody in the world would be able to maintain any kind of overview. And module selection would obviously be a big nightmare. It's already a nightmare for many. And so that's not going to scale. So the point of this exercise is, what do we need to start thinking about? What do we need to start putting in place so that as we go over the next couple of years to 60,000 modules or whatever the number is going to be, to make sure it scales? Because next year maybe we'll have 10,000 instead of 6,000. 2 years ago we only had 3,000. So the number definitely will go up. And just to give you an example, which actually WebChick gave in a presentation earlier this week, which is, in today's world, if you want to build one of those image carousels, what modules would you use? There's quite a few to choose from. Now imagine there is 10 times more. So it's, module duplication is already a little bit of a problem. I mean, I'm a big fan of, some module competition. I think it's healthy from a developer point of view to have a number of, competing modules. But from an end user point of view, it's pretty hard. It's pretty difficult to figure out how to, what modules to use. So, contributed repository with 6,000 modules is obviously, a very terrifying thought. And as I said, I don't know if 60,000 is going to be the right number. Maybe it's 30,000, maybe it's something else. I don't think modules might scale the same way as other things scale, but it's still a lot. So I think it's going to be hard for us to scale it by manual work. So I think we need to start looking at ways to, what things can we do to automate this? Like, is there automated performance testing that we can do? Can modules, and we actually did a little bit of work on that already, like can modules